get out on time for lunch. So welcome to this opening session about what MyData stands for. I'm really glad that you all are here because this concept and this project actually has a fairly rich history and it's rather complex. And so I think if we all start out with a firm foundation and understanding of what this whole MyData model and concept is, we'll be able to move forward more effectively in this conference and all kind of understand what's going on and be able to work together to develop some solutions. So this session will consist of 3 presentations. The first one by Tanel Mällo. He is the head of research administration of the Research Administration Office here at Tallinn University and a lead for Open Knowledge Estonia. Then he will be going over what MyData is. Then we'll have a presentation from Manon Molins and Albarede from Fing, Think and Do Tech in France, studying the next generation of the internet, and also project leads for Mes Infos. And they will be talking about how MyData can benefit everyone, and they'll really give a broad sweeping overview of what's been going on in this field and all the different players who have been involved. And then lastly, there'll be a presentation by me. My name is Molly Schwartz. I'm a studio manager at the Metropolitan New York Library Council in New York City, but I've actually been involved in the MyData project since 2014, and I'm an active member of Open Knowledge Finland. And also remember that we'll be using screen.io the entire time, and we'll actually take about 5 minutes for questions and answers following each individual presentation. And you can either type questions into screen.io, or we will also have a microphone roving around in the audience. So we can take advantage of the fact that we are all here together in person. And at the end, we'll wrap up with some lessons learned. So without further ado, I will give the microphone over to Tanel.
Thank you, Molly. I will also try to find this. So, welcome again to the main stage. My name is still Tanel. I still work here at this university. I run the MyData-ish things in Estonia and also in the global initiative for MyData. And as you may see, I've kind of challenging the so far formal way of presenting MyData things with a bit of more aggressive style, black on red, because I think this whole domain needs even a bit more action than there has been so far. So this session is about the nuts and bolts of MyData, so I have promised that we will try to take the MyData concept really into pieces and hand them over to you so you can try them out with your hands and try to put them together back again in order to create your own understanding of MyData. But first, MyData for dummies or for fools. So I'm quite sure that asking the question, what is MyData? It's the initial answer to this is, you fool, how don't you know what MyData is? It's really simple, it's MyData, so go on with your life. And this really is a simple answer that I don't know if my grandmother will understand it, but my mother now almost does. There still is the complex issue of the ownership of data, and this is something that we will handle with white gloves in the MyData domain, because as most of you probably know, data hardly ever is related to one person only. It's most of the times shared in one way or another between individuals or individuals and organizations. So there it's a bit step back from the fool's interpretation of MyData. So let's ask again, what is MyData? And see what the authorities say about it. So with the people from the MyData Global Initiative, just recently, before the conference, we managed to put together, as a result of 2 years' effort, the formal paper about the principles of MyData. So it's called the Declaration of MyData Principles, and all of you who received the bag from the registration, this bag should also include one newspaper-style thing, which has the declaration as a centerfold. So the declaration of MyData principles is the description of the concept and what it stands for and what are its pieces. So I see people wrapping it out already in the auditorium. So the declaration really tries to bring together the core concepts of the declaration, and it's written in such a way that organizations are able to sign it, declaring that they will chip in to the human-centric management of personal data. So this is what the MyData Declaration actually says. MyData means human-centric personal data, human-centric collection, use, management, and sharing of personal data. Sometimes it's also possible to say that it is human-focused personal data. So many different ways to relate to it. Another way of explaining what MyData is to see what MyData is not. And MyData is not organization-centric personal data. What is organizational-centric personal data? This is something that mostly is the status quo at the moment. In short, the figure describes the situation that there are places where data is created or collected as data sources. And then there are organizations that are using this data. Oftentimes they are one and the same. Oftentimes they exchange data between each other. Most of the time the individual with a happy face or unhappy face remains out of this picture. So no connection to the data except for it relates to them, but there's no control over it. So this is what we call the organization-centric personal data. That organizations are using personal data at best to offer better services for the individual, but the individual has very little to do with controlling which data is collected, how it is used, and also the individual has no chance to use it elsewhere. So in the MyData situation, the easiest way to say what's different from the organization-centric is that we have another bit on this picture. We might call it operator, the MyData operator. That's the official term. We use it in the declaration. What's a MyData operator? Well, it's a piece of infrastructure, mostly, that helps the individual to manage, to get access to his or her personal data and then manage it. Manage its sharing, collection, and so forth. So there's a lot of things to be done to add this one bit to this picture to create the human-centric personal data management. There should be technologies for consenting or other ways to be able to make the data controllable by the individual. And there definitely need to be services that create an open ecosystem that serves both the interests of the individual, but also naturally the interest of the organizations. So we're not trying to get rid of the organizations, because then who would be serving us the nice services? What MyData is aiming for is a more fair and balanced relationship between individuals and organizations. So that's the answer for the question, what good ever came out of this MyData, or what will come out of this as we expect. So in a situation where individuals have greater control over their personal data, we expect that this will work us towards a more fair relationships between individuals and between individuals and organizations, the individuals and governments as organizations. This will enable the sharing of the power and of the benefits of the personal data. Also, it seems that quite likely this will have an effect on the collective good. This will have an effect how we run our society. Maybe the change will be really huge. Maybe it will be a minor change. But definitely there are things happening there as well. If the individuals get control over their personal data, if they decide to use this data for personal good or for the collective good, big things are bound to happen. So this is one topic that will be covered in the Our Data track several times during the conference. So in order to get to the MyData situation, there are shifts that need to be made. So what will change? It's quite simple, actually, if we skip the difficult part that I was looking for in my pocket. So 3 shifts that we expect to happen, that are happening right now, but that still need an extra push. First of all, currently, as individuals in Estonia and in the European Union, we actually already do have quite great control over our personal data. But oftentimes, most of the time, it's formal rights. So there's hardly any system to take these rights into effect because there's no infrastructure that would enable the individual to use the personal data. So a shift that needs to happen is moving from formal rights to really actionable rights, towards an infrastructure that enables me as an individual, as the controller of my data, to use those rights and put them into effect. This will lead to a second shift, which is from data protection to data empowerment. So today, what we have around data in the discussions and what's happening oftentimes focuses on data protection, on privacy and security, which is naturally a really important issue. But if we protect things too much, if we lock them away, it sometimes happens today that personal data is protected so well that even I, as the person whose data it is, am not able to access it, not able to view it, and not able to use it elsewhere than it was initially created. So in order to start using your personal data, again, we have to move forward from the protection issues and start thinking about how data can empower people, how it can empower us as individuals, how it can empower communities and nations and governments. So underlying this, there's a third shift that needs to take place. So this is a shift from closed ecosystems to open ecosystems. So what we have today largely is that personal data is generated and collected in many, many places. Every app you use, either it's a big GAFA app or a small app that you just downloaded that will go bankrupt next week, it's using personal data, it's collecting personal data. And oftentimes, it represents a closed ecosystem, which means that the personal data that is generated will remain in the place where it is generated, and there's no extra usage to it. So what MyData stands for is a vision of an open ecosystem where the organizations and individuals have a clear understanding that shared data most probably will benefit everybody in the picture more than closed and protected and kept away data. So this is what we need to be moving towards too. So what else is MyData? MyData as a movement. So the couple of things that are MyData-ish today already. So the Finns have developed the MyData reference architecture. There are some technological developments that already enable organizations and governments to put MyData into use at spot. We have developed, like I said in the beginning, the MyData Global Network, and many of the people that are gathering here today and tomorrow and Friday in Helsinki are members of this network. The group effort of this network is the MyData principles that many of the network members have already signed up to, committing to the human-centric principles of personal data management. And underlying this global network is really a network of local MyData hubs that are now popping up in many countries all across the world. And naturally, then there's the MyData Conference. So this year and towards next year, several large initiatives will merge to create the MyData Global organization. So up to now, the global network has only partly contributed to organizing the conference, for example. Next year, hopefully, we will already function as a one uniform organization that has the MyData Conference as the main conference for the global community, as it is right now, but then just also formally integrated. So one of the last things I want to stress from this list is really the MyData local hubs. So like I pointed out previously, what MyData stands for is an open community. We think that sharing personal data and data as such, as MyData has grown out of the open knowledge movement, we believe that being open and sharing the data, the services, integrating them with each other, sharing knowledge about the pilots that you might be running around personal data in your organization. This is really valuable stuff. And we are really happy to see that the MyData local hubs are happening here and there. Mostly in these hubs, the organization of the hubs is just really simple. People who are inspired by the MyData keywords. They come together on monthly basis or quarterly basis to exchange ideas, to exchange experience, to hear what others are doing in their country and internationally. So this is really a huge place to exchange experience and learn from the others' experience and do things together. So in Estonia, we have quite many people from the government sector participating in the MyData local hubs, in the Estonian local hub of MyData. And as you have heard from the keynote speaker, our government CIO, Siim Sikkut, it has already had impact on the government agenda. And so it has happened already last year in Finland, where MyData is already written into government agenda. So it's really a movement that has people inside it, and then in this way it will have an impact on the society which is far greater than any single organization or individual could have. So I think that now you know MyData a bit more, and I'm thankful to take some questions and then hand it over to the people from France.
Okay, so some of you have been typing some questions into screen.io, and also I would like to reiterate that at the end of this session, again, we'll be doing the lessons learned portion. So also if there are things that you find that are main takeaways, type them in below the questions and we'll go over them at the end. So I'm going to start with a question from the screen.io. And this is actually, I'm going to combine a couple of questions into like one. It's a two-parter. And it's a couple of people asking for more specifics about what MyData would be. So this question is asking, would MyData act as a kind of union that represents user rights toward data using services, or is it only a tool for communication between the stakeholders? And I would like to add on to that the question about would MyData be an NGO and controlled by who? By the state. So I think this is important to clarify what MyData actually is.
Thank you. So at this point, I think it's the easiest way to say is that MyData is a movement. So in a similar fashion, I like to compare it or draw the parallel with the green movement or open movement. So this is a really large-scale thing that is happening. It has many constituent parts, people acting in places, bringing into life the MyData pilots, the human-centric pilots, or any kind of personal data-related pilots. But in really broad terms, this is a global movement that has its aim on handing the control over personal data to individuals.
And are there any questions from the audience now? There, and I think we have a roving microphone that is coming to you.
I wanted to continue the idea that you said that MyData is a social movement. I'm a sociologist. I know what social movements are, and they usually have an enemy. So who do you need to convince? Who is your enemy? What are the obstacles that you need to overcome?
Thank you. Well, MyData is a special kind of social movement that tries to bring into the scene of social movements a new thinking and not focusing on enemies. Well, like I said in the presentation, currently the situation around personal data is heavily organization-centric. And this is only logical. There's no need to see any big evil behind it. It's just that the systems that we are using, the services that we are using on a daily basis, they have been built by organizations. And organizations do have to keep their interests in mind so that they can keep going. What we're saying is that organizations are not the enemies of individuals. We just need to be heading towards a more balanced situation so that the value and the benefits of the personal data use will be shared in a more fair way between the individuals and the organizations. So there's no enemy, there's just a rebalancing act.
Thanks, and I think we have time for one more quick one. I wanted to lump this question from screen.io in. Does MyData welcome commercial organizations, since you were just speaking about organizations? Would they need to adhere to key principles? And I'm actually going to throw in a second one again, which is there room for standards of data entry in such an ambiguous movement? And so I think these questions are both getting to issues of standards and key principles and how to kind of keep some coherence in what this movement stands for.
Thank you. Yes, the answer to the question whether commercial organizations are welcome to MyData is a definite yes. And in fact, the MyData Declaration is currently up on the web for signing by individuals and by organizations who are willing to commit to following the human-centric personal data principles. So there you have it. Just sign it and then fulfill the commitment, regardless whether you are a commercial entity or a government agency or so forth. And it is only natural that the collection of principles that we have put together right now cannot act in a vacuum. So there needs to be something that is more actionable. And for this, we definitely are soon moving towards standardized procedures that organizations can follow in order to make sure that they become more and more human-centric.
Yeah, thanks so much. And again, we'll have another Q&A session at the end, so if anything comes to mind. Thanks very much, Tanel, for your presentation. And now we will welcome Manon and Marine to the stage to talk about some of these organizations who have already been involved in MyData. And I saw there were some questions about use cases, and I think they'll touch on some of those.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. Hello, everyone. I'm Marine Albarede from Fing, and here's my colleague, Manon. Doesn't seem to be working. Yeah, okay. Where is the remote? Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, so we're gonna start. Yes, so just one quick word about Fing. Fing is a French NGO which works specifically on digital transformation. We are studying how the digital technologies are transforming and reshaping society on various fields such as work transformations, urban planning, and so on. And we are trying to analyze and to understand these transformations. And we have been working on personal data field for at least 6 years, I think, with a project called Mes Infos, which basically means MyData. It's the exact translation, Mes Infos. And in France, what's important to note, because maybe you are going to hear this word in our presentation, is that we are not talking about MyData, but we are using another word, which is self-data. That's a word we use in France, but basically it means the same. And for Fing, at Fing, and I know this is the case for many participants here, we are convinced that there can be a huge value derived from the paradigm shift we are describing with MyData. And by value, I mean both economic value, but also use value. And we are convinced that it can benefit this MyData vision, it can benefit to almost everyone. So yeah, but before discussing this topic of value, let's just start with what's really happening today behind the MyData, because MyData is, there are principles, it's also a strong concept, but a lot is currently happening, even if the movement is quite recent. Maybe just to give you some insights. There are some movement around the legal concept and the legal context, and the legal context made a great move forward last year with the GDPR at European level, and especially with a new right concerning individuals, which is the portability right, which possibly enable, if applied, which is normally mandatory, it possibly enable the individuals to gain control over the data by downloading their data or by transmitting their data directly to service providers, and hopefully more privacy by design services. So that's one great step. But we are also seeing lots and more organizations and conferences popping out everywhere, like Tanel said. Some of them use other words than MyData. You probably heard about the VRM project. But there are some other organizations use the word personal information economy. But basically, they are all talking about a human-centric personal data model. So they are quite close to the MyData vision. And there are more and more publications related to these organizations. but also coming from researchers from various fields such as sociology, marketing field, legal field, and yeah, MyData is today a great field for researchers. That's why there are many academic workshops today and in the today coming in Helsinki. But probably more concrete and more interesting for you is that we're also seeing startups and a new market emerging. You will probably meet some of them in the space just next to the room here. You probably know Gigimi, Cozy Cloud, Pixio, Miko, and so on. But there are also multiplayer pilot projects emerging. And some of them are launched by governments, such as the Blue and Green Button in the US, or MyData project with an eye in the UK. But others are launched and run by NGO, by startups, by even researchers team. So that's very interesting. We're going to talk, to go a bit deeper in each of this project, but you probably have some question in mind. Why are these actors moving in that way today? What are the expectations? Where is the value eventually behind MyData? So yes, we are convinced that MyData model can benefit to almost everyone. And maybe the most obvious, it concerns the individuals. Tanel talked about several promises of MyData for individuals, but just imagine a world in which individuals can have access to the data, but they can also use them however they like. For them, it's a possibility to gain in real control over the data, but it's also opening a new field of uses and of possibilities. I think we listed some of the uses possible. We identified 7 of them, but there are plenty other ones. If you have your data, it's a way to gain in self-knowledge. I mean by keeping tracks of your past behaviors or of your past action, of your consumption, for instance, or of your relationships with plenty of organizations. But it's also a way maybe to better manage your daily life or to make better choices because you will have more information, or even maybe to act according to your value. I mean, if you have all the information about your behavior, your consumption, maybe you will be able to reduce your carbon footprint. That's just an example. But we are convinced that MyData can also benefit for 2 organizations on several levels. The first one is there is probably a gain in trust. I mean, by handing back the data to your clients, to your customers, it will probably mean a gain of image, a gain of trust, and even a gain of loyalty. First opportunity. The second one is that to enable people, individuals, to use their raw data, you will have to provide them some services. Of course, once again, privacy by design services, services that would really respect privacy, and organizations, even data holders, they can be the one that will provide these services. So second opportunity, opening a new field of services. And third one is third opportunity is that it's a way maybe to improve the quality of data, which is today a problem for many organizations that have wrong, obsolete data in their IT system. It's likely that if people, the individuals, benefit from the data, they will have an interest in keeping this data updated. And maybe they will accept to share sometimes this data to the organizations that provide them services, to have customized services based on this data. But there are also benefits for society. I will go very quickly on that because Tanel talked about it a bit. It's an opportunity to get a society in which power but also information are well balanced. It's also an opportunity to have an healthier economy. I mean, if people have tools to help them compare between several services, they will be able to enhance competition between services. So yeah, that's for the value part. But as I know, it's probably still a bit abstract for you. Let's show you where the value is through concrete projects. Well, the first one is not that concrete. I mean, you probably heard about the VRM movement once again, but it's really important to talk about it, but because it was really inspiring for most of the actors here, most of the startups that you will meet in MyData. The project VRM was launched. It's an R&D project launched a few years ago by doctors in the US. Today, it's gathering many players from all around the world around this VRM vision. And it's really about building and sharing this vision. So what's exactly VRM? It's the customer side counterpart of the CRM, vendor relationship management. And what VRM described is a society in which people, the individuals, will have VRM tools that will enable them to store their data wherever they like, but also to use their data however they like. And through these VRM tools, they will be able to choose who they want to share their data with, for what amount of time, precisely. So there are many promises behind this movement. The first one concerning the individuals is, of course, getting more control over the data, getting new services that will enable you to save money, for instance, or to gain in community. The fact that you can share the data to get more personalized services, they call it intercasting, and that's a very interesting concept. Opportunity for organizations, the classic ones, I talked about it a bit earlier, and for society, of course, more balanced society. As you see in the scheme, VRM customer can discuss directly on the same level with a CRM vendor. So yes, a more balanced society. The second project we would like to talk to you about is another very inspiring project, because it's another pioneering project. It was launched it has nothing to do with, almost nothing with the MyData here, the MyData Conference. It was launched a few years ago in 2011 in the UK, directly by the British government. And it was supposed to be a multi-sectoral project in which the government gathered several big corporations and convinced them to hand back the data they collect directly to their customers. It was the ambition at the very start. It was very high ambition, and then they switch a bit and they choose to focus on one part specifically, on providing services to individuals to help them make better choices, to help them compare between different offers. Services such as GoCompare, that maybe some of you know. So it's interesting because the ambition was really about data at the very start. It was very interesting, and then it switched a bit on services. But still, the promises was here at the beginning, and promises, classic ones, once again, to offer individual a way to reach the true 360 degrees, to know everything about their daily life, to access new and use new services, etc. What's interesting about this project, which is a particular way to see the MyData model, is that it was really about economic value, about economic opportunities. The idea behind the fact to hand back the data to the individuals was that better informed customers would be able to make better choices. And by then, they would be able to choose between different service providers, and then it will enhance competition, and then it will enhance growth. So that's why their vision of the MyData model. So it's another example, yeah, interesting, but it has been quite dormant for 3 years at least, because they encountered many challenges, many difficulties.
Okay, so another example of a MyData model, of an embodiment of a MyData model, is the green and the blue button. So these initiatives were born in the United States. And like MyData with an eye that Marin just presented, it's a government initiative that is supported by, was supported by the Obama administration, but the similarity stops there. So just to explain what it is very quickly, today 150 million Americans can download their health data, and more than 60 million of Americans can download their energy data. And the game changer here is that they can download their data, but they can also transmit it to third-party services like apps or service providers. So in a practical way, if you are a citizen in the United States and you are part of those 150 million and 60 millions, you can go online on the website of your service provider. So for instance, health service provider like hospitals, labs, pharmacy, and energy service providers like electric or gas companies. You can go on those websites and you see this little logo there, green button or blue button, and you can click on it, and if you identify yourself with your login and your password, you can retrieve your data from their information system to yours. So a service, an app or a service that you choose of your choice. So, just very quickly, it's not a mandatory program. It was supported by the government, but it's not mandatory like the UK one. It's more like a voluntary effort by those service providers to put those logos and to use the standards behind it, because there are lots of technical standards behind it. So if we go back to the question of this session, like what are the benefits for individuals, it's quite clear when we're talking about health data and energy data. For instance, with health data, you can transmit your health data from like all the different hospitals you went to your entire life, and you can transmit it to another doctor if you move, or you can share it with caregivers, or you can have a full overview of your health throughout your life. And when you look at energy, that's what Marin, you said earlier, if you transmit your energy data from your service provider to an app or a service, it can help you reduce your carbon footprint or even just save you money on your bill every month. And so if the benefits for individuals are quite clear, organizations stand to gain as well from this model, from this example. For instance, in the health system, the goal here is to empower the patient, right? It's to put him in the center, because they think that, and I think we do too, that the patient is the one who knows the most about his disease, his condition, and he should be the one in control of the flow of information about him. So that he can, for instance, correct errors in some files that a service provider gave him, so he can like better the quality of data within the IT systems of organizations, so that the health system is more efficient for everyone. Another example, this one is Italian. So we did like United States with VRM and green button. We did UK, now this is Italy. So this one is quite interesting too. This one is sectorial, so it's not health data, it's not energy data, it's telecommunication data. And this one is not governmental, it is led by a private organization called Telecom Italia, which is like the major telecommunication operator in Italy. What they did, so they started a lab in a city, I can't remember the name of the city, in a city in Italia, and they partner with Coop. Coop is like one of the main supermarket chain in Italy also. So they both team up, Telecom Italia and Coop, and they did an experiment. So what Telecom Italia did was they built a platform that they called MyData Store, because the name is like, we all use that name, MyData now. And what they did, they provided to 100 testers. And those testers, I think there are more now, and those testers could get their data from Telecom Italia, like geolocation for news, and their data from co-op, like supermarket data, like what did you bought last week, or anything like that. They could retrieve that data into that platform, and they could use services, like for instance, to analyze their shopping pattern or their mobility pattern. So they could do things with that data. And for organizations, it's also a very good way to have different relations with your customers, and for instance, for cities to involve the citizen when you want to analyze mobility patterns or shopping patterns. So last example, but not the least, that's the one we are working on. So this is one we are going to spend just a little bit more time on. It's called the Mesinfo project. We call it the Mesinfo pilot this year. We think it's a good way to understand the MyData model, to understand the roles within the MyData model, and to understand why do people want to be part of this model, why do people want to change their way. Like we said it quite earlier, but this is like the moment where we explain why real and concrete organizations came into this project to implement this model. So Marine will give you an overview of the project, and I will go deeper into the data later.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so we decided to launch the Mesinfo project in 2012, I think. We spent some years to explore the subject and to pick some ideas from the VRM project, from the MyData UK project as well. And we mixed all this idea to build the project as it is today. We decided to gather several organizations from several sectors, and we tried, in the British project, to convince them to hand back the data. It was not mandatory. We are, once again, an NGO. The government is totally out, it's not a part of the Mesinfo project, but then we tried to convince them to hand back personal data to their customers. So same idea than in the British project. And after a first experiment in 2013 or 14, we decided to launch a pilot project, which was supposed to last. So we launched this pilot project last year, and we are right in the middle right now. So here is the shape of the pilot project. We have several partners, data holders, coming from different sectors, insurance, banks, we have telco operator, energy providers, but we also have one local authority involved, which is the Grand Lyon. So it's mostly private, but it's interesting to see this public actor coming. And they have decided to share, really, the data with individuals. 6 of them are actually doing that already in this year. So this organization, it's important to understand that they have several various expectations behind this pilot, depending on them. Most of them are expecting this gain of trust I was talking to you about earlier in the relationship with their customers. But they are also expect to invent, to imagine, to prototype new services and to test them directly in this pilot project. But they also see the pilot, and it's more interesting maybe, they also see the pilot project as a sandbox for portability, right? They can think about new ways to transmit the data, they can develop these new ways, I mean API and so on, and yeah, they can test them, they can experiment this process within the pilot. So yeah, they will hand back the data to thousands of testers who will be able to access this data through their own personal cloud. Each of the testers will have one's personal cloud. We decided to work with a French startup called Cozy Cloud, which already providing actually the cloud solution, the personal cloud solution. And through this personal cloud, they will not only access to their raw data, but also to some services provided by third-party players, or even by the data holders themselves. For the individuals, the expectations are quite different. Some of them are just expecting to, are exciting about testing new services, innovative services, but most of them are expecting to gain in control. So we also have a community of reusers involved. And by reusers, we mean developers, schools, startups working on prototyping new services. And it's really a big challenge because we have to attract new startups on a totally new market in which business models are not really established yet, but we are working on that. And then there is also a team of researchers involved in the project because we want to learn, and that's the first, probably one of the first purpose of the pilot project. We want to learn about what interests the individuals. Is it the data? Is it just the services? The promise to gain in commodity? And how they can use their personal cloud, which is a totally new object as well. It's also interesting to see that. So there are sociologists, researchers in marketing field, I think in technical field as well. But that's it. That's the shape of the pilot right now.
Yeah. So I'm going to go a bit deeper into the partners. What do they do? So as you said, like they are hoping for many different things, and like the one thing they do first and foremost is like they give back the data to individuals. So just very quickly, for us it's very important to have several sectors represented. Like we don't want to be a one sector pilot. So we have insurance providers that give back data to their clients. We have, and they give back, like for instance, data about insurance contract. We have telecommunication operator giving back data on the phone uses, like who did you call at which time, your geolocation, your in-demand video, on-demand video, like what did you see, which movie, at which time. And of course, energy providers like and distributors that can give back data from smart meters, like your energy consumption and data from contract. And the user, the tester, can also add himself any kind of data he wishes. Data from social network, bank data, photos. So these are the kind of data that are not too complicated to retrieve. So he can do it himself. Yeah, so what they are hoping is to give back the data to each individual. So we developed APIs, and what I want to say here is this is real data. It's machine-readable data. It's not PDF. Like they built the technical systems that can go from their IT to the causes. So our goal is to have like many more, so that the individual can have a 360-degree vision of his life thanks to his data and get complete and full control. So last slide, we just shared how the MyData model can benefit everyone, individuals, organizations, society, but we know it comes under certain conditions. We didn't speak about it at all. I think Molly is going to speak a bit more about it, but we want to share just 3 learnings that we got from all of those pilots, and especially the Maison for one. First, people don't care about their data. Like all those 00100, of course they don't care. They don't care to retrieve it from the information system of companies. So that's why they need tools. They need the platform, and they need the services plugged into the platforms to give them use value, like better manage their life, make better decisions, save money, reduce carbon footprint. So that's the first condition, and we cannot stress this enough. We need services so that individuals can gain control and can gain use value from their data, and also for organizations to see an interest in it. Like they need to see that those services can help them better understand their clients and have a better relation with their clients. So This is one of the most important conditions for the MyData model to benefit everyone in society.
And yes, it's important to know that we are not that naive, so there are many difficulties still. The second condition is that we probably have to help organizations to do this paradigm shift. I mean, corporate IT, for instance, is definitely not ready to hand back the data to individuals. There hasn't been built to share data with the clients. They had been built only for internal users. So there is really a heavy workload to do there to help the organizations make this transition. And yeah, there are many challenges inside the organizations concerning legal department that had to be reassured as well. And you have to bring together lots of various departments from the organization, like marketing department, legal, technical, etc. It's really it's a big project for each organization. But in this case, GDPR, and it's important to note, once again, is a great lever. Yeah. And last but not least, yes, we have many issues to answer. We are trying to do it within the pilot. Other projects are trying to, but we will face many difficulties in the coming years, probably technical ones. One of them concerns the interoperability of the platforms, of the tools. Others concerns the consent, how to get real consent, informed consent from the individuals. So many questions. But Molly, I think, will go a bit deeper about these issues in the next sessions.